all these things that you touched on are like all stuff I've seen. I mean, pretty much all of it in Wisconsin. Um, a lot of it in Nebraska too, which that was a huge game in Nebraska. Is killing. I mean, they got to walk miles to get to the food sources, and if it's an unpressured area, they start that trip in daylight. But usually, you kill them in the browse on the way. And I had no idea what wild sunflower looked like or any of that stuff. And I was like, man, this stuff is a pain to get through, but it looks like the deer are just hanging out in it. And I mean, it was so important to understand the point in which deer are going to hang up and know what they're going to select for. And a lot of the times bed there because of it, and know that browse is in an area of security as well as their bed, where they don't have to actually exit their bed to get to the secondary food source and you're cutting them off between. But if you can make your setup at the point that they're starting to browse, the time that they're going to be there is far greater than the time that they're going to be when they extend past it in daylight. They're going to spend a lot of time browsing all around you, and you're as close to within that bubble as you can possibly get.
No, that's spot on. Like these plants are, they're all providing structure. Like if a deer can feed where he feels like he has structure up at least belly high, he's going to feel comfortable walking around in that in daylight. Whereas if it's an ag field where it's just wide open, like deer go out in ag fields all the time, and that's where they're usually headed to. But if you can find these plants, and we haven't even talked about woody browse, like the different trees to look for stump sprouts, but if you can find these plants and this kind of habitat leading between bedding and the destination food source, whether that be a food plot or ag or whatever it is, that's where they're going to be spending their time in daylight. We all know they're going to go bed down during the day. They spend 4 to 6 hours in that destination food plot or food source, right around dusk, and then they'll bed down a little bit, and then they may feed a little bit in the morning, and in the morning they're heading back to get in that secure bed. And they're ruminants, so they're designed that they go out there and feed as fast as they can and eat as much as they can really, really quickly, and basically they're just nipping it off and swallowing it, and it goes down into a chamber of their stomach where it just sits there until it's full. Well, then they go and lay down, and it's like advantageous, so they don't have to be feeding all the time. They can actually limit the amount of time they're feeding and then get into better cover and lay down in bed so they're not exposed to predators or hunters or anything else. And they sit there and they just chew that cud, and they'll do that for a couple hours. Well, then in the morning time, they'll usually always get up after they've chewed their cud for a couple hours, and they'll feed around. They may only move 100 yards, but they'll feed around in all of this type of habitat, all of this type of cover and food in the timber or in the old field areas, and they're safe, they're secure, and they're getting fed, and then they'll bed down again, kind of midday time frame or whatever, and then they'll get up. And some days they get up earlier than others. We all know that certain days are greater than others as far as deer activity before daylight, but they're still getting up. They're still getting up, and they're moving during the day. Deer are not nocturnal. They do not lay down. They move every single day. It's just that most of the time they're in this type of stuff moving, and they're not moving as far a lot of times during the day until that last movement. And so if you can key in on these type of things, learn these plants, you don't even have to know the plants. Just start walking through the woods and noticing what deer are eating, or while you're watching deer in the woods, use your binoculars and see what they're eating. Like, try to focus in on what were they browsing on. Were they actually eating acorns, or were they actually browsing on little plants and little tree shrubs and stuff like that? Then if you can't tell what it is from there, go down and investigate what it is. See what they actually nipped off. Get an app that'll tell you what it is, iNaturalist or whatever, if you want to learn what plant it is. And then on iNaturalist, you can go and see where that plant shows up. You can type in any plant on iNaturalist, and then maybe you got your public land and you're like, I want to know where old field asters have been seen. And then you can look on the public land and see, oh, old field asters are seen here, 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 and here. Well, this type of habitat on the map looks like this type of terrain or this certain feature. So now I know what features I can go and key in on. We always talk about this for, looking at aerial maps and seeing stuff on the map that shows up that we like to key in on, find that place that you like, find another one that looks like that on the map, go check it out. Well, you can kind of do the same thing with this app. Take these plants that you know that deer are browsing on, where they've been seen or spotted, and they've been pinned. Well, then you can go and look for those plants as well. So you start looking for the browse. They're not just eating acorns. They're not just eating ag. They're eating all of this stuff during the day. Knowing where these are, keying in on these will help you be more successful at seeing them in daylight.
Yeah.
All right, I gotta ask. This is bothering my mind. Everybody talks about how certain places don't have the soil to grow big deer. Take it from there.
All right. Soil is a big part of it. There are certain areas that the soil is just better. I mean, Iowa just has the best soil. There's no doubt about that. Their ag, their row crops, they're upset if they don't get 300 bushel an acre corn. Down here, our farmers are pretty happy if they make 175.
Wow.
So there is more nutrient soil. But what is common about the soil in, say, Iowa and the Midwest? Think about Nebraska and Kansas. Think about the Black Belt in Alabama. What do those type of habitats look like?
Prairie.
What, the glaciers helped build the soil up in Iowa and stuff, but what built the soil up in those other areas?
Plate tectonics?
The prairies.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Prairie. These plants, these plants that they're coming up and growing up, and then fire setting them back, or back then they have buffalo coming through, and they would just mob graze it and stomp a lot of it down. It's like building organic matter on the soil, and the soil is healthier. Not only that, all of these plants, when you have a true old field area, each one of these plants, we saw that when we were listing off these plants, they had different levels of phosphorus, different levels of calcium. Some of them are legumes, so they're actually putting nitrogen back in the soil. Buckwheat's known, everybody knows about buckwheat for food plots. Well, buckwheat's known to put phosphorus back in the soil. Certain plants will go through the soil with their deep tap roots, mine a certain nutrient up into their structure, and then now they've just taken that great nutrient that's way down deep in the soil, brought it up to the soil surface. It dies over, falls down. Now it's at the soil surface, so other plants are starting to use that nutrient, and all these other plants they're working together with each other. They're in symbiotic relationship. So this plant's really good at getting this nutrient. This plant's really good at getting this nutrient. They're helping each other out across the board. They're adding all this organic matter. Fire comes through there and sort of resets everything to where it comes back out, and it actually adds potash into the soil when you burn. So when you're doing all this, it's actually getting the best out of the soil and promoting it. We have come in and screwed a lot of it up with our tillage practices and different things like that, and then just letting some cases timber just grow up and not be managed. And so we've depleted the soil in a lot of cases in a lot of areas. And if you're in real sandy soil, it's just not going to be as fertile as that deep, rich black soil in the Black Belt or in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Chris.
Would you say then that, do you feel like the soil has a direct, result of their racks, or do you feel like that's more of a genes thing, or how would you, for example, down there in the South in the Black Belt, and I know there's a lot of, you got to get to maturity and all that too, but can you guys just touch on that?
Mississippi State did a great research on that. They took deer from 3 different regions of Mississippi, and they brought them and put them in captivity just to see if it's genetics or soil or whatever it is. And they brought them into captivity, and the Delta deer are the biggest deer. that are being harvested. Everybody knows about the Delta of Mississippi. It's a great area to kill big bucks. Then you have like the lowest plains region. Then you have the coastal. And so like they have 3 different soil types basically. And they took deer from those 3 different areas respectively. And they did a great research on figuring out what is causing antler growth and body size. And after feeding these deer for 2 years, they all express the same size. So that tells me, yeah, soil. And then, you can even increase the amount of weight and antler growth if you're promoting these species on their property. So like if you have all of these on your property, or if you have all of these on the public that you're hunting, then they're probably getting everything they need. And so, yes, soil does have a big part of it, but it's also, well, how, even if you have the best soil in the world, if you don't have the best habitat on that soil, it's not producing big deer.
Wow.
You can't have black belt rich soil that's just solid sweet gums and expect it to grow a 170. It's not going